Greetings, welcome. So where I'm at today, it is cold. I mean really cold, like scary cold. End of the world cold. So I'm not saying, I'm just saying. All right, today what we're gonna do is have some fun looking at a coil or maybe a couple coils with this new LCR meter that I got. And I think it's similar to a lot of other LCR meters. I really like it, except it has one really cool feature, and that is you can measure at any variable frequency continuously between 100 hertz and 100,000 hertz. And when we put it on a coil, I'll mention one of the reasons why I think that's just dandy. So without further ado, let's look at the East Tester ET433. And I'll tell you what I like about it, what I don't like about it. I don't know if I can even call this a review because I don't have an electronics background. I just kind of stumbled into this hobby and now I'm having fun with it. So it's mainly just having fun with this meter, and there might be people that know a lot more than me. They're like, you've got to hit that toggle switch if you want to get an accurate reading, kind of thing. Because that is one of the issues, is sometimes it just spits out nonsense, and that's kind of not good. But for the most part, it works really well. And it may be that I'm not using it correctly, but let's get down to it. Okay. So I suppose the place to begin is, what is an LCR meter? So from its name, it's a meter that measures inductance L, capacitance C, and resistance R. So we have three meters here. The middle one is a DVM, a digital voltmeter. And so it measures voltage, but it measures more than just voltage. This one will measure AC and DC voltage. It measures resistance. So like the LCRs, you can get resistance from a voltmeter, digital voltmeter. And it measures some stuff, continuity and stuff with like diodes and whatnot. This thing measures temperature. I've never used that. But the main other thing you'll generally find is that it also measures current. So that's what these, basically what you use the most for is, well, those three things: voltage, current, and resistance. But we're missing two. We can't measure capacitance, which sometimes isn't that big a deal because you're often using a cap that, well, this is a 10 UF cap within 5 or 10% of what's on the label. So it's nice to get it, more accurate, but there's no label on a coil for inductance. So what I find most useful with LCR meters is being able to measure the inductance of coils. With this one, though, there's something really special about it in terms of using it to measure resistance, and we'll get to that in a moment. So here are just the two LCR meters that I now own. And this one is from Exitech that I had picked up some years ago, and now here is the new one. There are things that I like and dislike about each of them. Now, one of the things that this one does a much better job with is when we fire this up, you'll see that the screen is dim and the lettering is very small. So you sometimes don't know, is that millihenries or nanofarads? What am I looking at here? On the plus, that means the battery lasts a long time, but when you need to change out the battery on this, you have to pull the 9-volt out and put in a fresh one or recharge the 9-volt, which is what I do. This one is more modern, that is just like your cell phone. It's probably a lithium ion, although I don't know, in there. The battery lasts a long time, but when it starts, only being 2 bars instead of 4, you just plug it into a USB like your cell phone and it charges up in a couple hours. So that's just super. Score one for East Tester. Now, just being an amateur and fiddling around with this, I'm not sure I've unlocked half the capabilities of either of the meters. But what you're generally doing is just for the device under test, you're just cycling between looking at, induction, capacitance, and resistance, depending on what you're looking at or what you want to know about it. So that's the LCR, and you just press it repeatedly. And so over here we have the same thing. You press that repeatedly. The other important button that you see on here, frequency, and on here, frequency. The way I understand these things work is they're sending like a sine wave signal and looking at the thing you're measuring at a particular frequency. And so this one has two frequencies from memory, 120 hertz and 1 kilohertz. So you press it once, 120, again, 1 kilohertz. This one, as I said, allows you to go through to whatever frequency you want. So if we fire up the Exitech and we put it on, this was just sort of a random coil. This was one that I was using to spin rotors some time back. It's 22 gauge and 800 winds. And we see that it has 9.849 millihenries. We press the frequency again, 9.87, so just about exactly the same. Now somewhere on there, it tells us what frequency, I don't think I can get it to show up, what frequency we're running at, get it to show up on the camera. I literally sometimes use a flashlight and a magnifying glass trying to figure out, well, which frequency is it. But let's do something else. So there's induction. Here it's trying to figure out what the capacity, I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong thing. Same to you. So here we're on the resistance. It's saying 4.58 ohms. So we switch 4.73. Well, that's actually not dramatic enough. Let me put this on another coil just to really show you what I'm talking about. So just for a moment, let's put it on this ginormous coil, and it measures 4.26 ohms of resistance. And if we put it on the multimeter, it probably measures 4.2, 4.1. Now we're going to change the frequency, and it says no, it's 14.8 ohms of resistance. So it's like, well, which is it? 4.2 or is it 14? And sort of thinking, well, those rascals, I spent all this money for this thing, and it doesn't even do a good job measuring resistance. The multimeter never does that. It just gives me the number. This thing changes all over the place. And what finally occurred to me one day is, it's like, my gosh, of course it changes, because what it's measuring is at a frequency with probably a sine wave. And so as you increase in frequency, the 100 hertz, 120 hertz gives you a reading just about what you would get with a DVM. When you go to 1 kilohertz with that huge coil, even at 1 kilohertz, you're getting a lot of reactive resistance in your coil occurring as well. And so what that reading actually is giving you the impedance of the coil at those two frequencies, 120 hertz and 1 kilohertz. It's giving you the straight line DC resistance plus whatever reactive resistance you're getting from the current having to change in an environment with a lot of induction. So I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if you had an LCR meter where you could set the frequency to anything you want and then measure the resistance? Because then you could see when the skin effect and the proximity effect start coming into play, at what frequency. So to throw one, just one more wrinkle at you, you want a coil of high induction and low resistance. So you want a lot of wire, then that gives you a lot of turns, and if it's a multi-layer, a lot of layers, and so that gives you a lot of proximity effect. And to lower the resistance, you want thicker wire, and thicker wire, you run into skin effect at lower frequencies. So you start to see the trade-off. You want high induction and low resistance, but in doing so, you can run into more reactive resistance at lower frequencies. So that's the sort of the whole game of how do you set the coil up to not run into as much reactive resistance. And this allows you to see it, because you can say, well, at 1500 hertz it looks like this much resistance, and at 2000 hertz it looks like that much, and you can see exactly where the reactive resistance begins to predominate for your coil, whichever coil. So I'll show that to you in a minute, but let's do this stuff I probably should have started with. And here it is on Amazon. It's $282. It gets 4 stars. And this is the 433 from a company out of China. And they have other ones like the 430 that are much cheaper, but they don't give you this continuously variable from 100 hertz to 100 kilohertz test frequency option. And this, I think, was the only LCR meter I found that did this. And otherwise you have to shell out, maybe 500, but probably more like 1,000 for either a desktop, or I think they're called, what are they called? Network analyzers. Someone knows better than me, but something like that, which does the same thing. But this was the cheapest option I found in order to do this. And I will say, when I first bought this thing, I was very disappointed, because it only seemed to have 6 preset frequencies, and it didn't do the continuously variable part. So I was looking on the internet, and there's no videos for this. Again, I think this is probably a small or new Chinese company, and well, there it is. They don't do oftentimes a great job with documentation, but they made an effort here, and it's not, it's all coherent. However, if we go back, this is the manual, and it covers the whole series, and what I'm interested in is the 433. So if we go over here, we'll find selection of frequency, which is what I was interested in. And here is all that it tells you. These are the frequencies for the different models, except for this one, which can be continuously adjustable to a step of 1 hertz. And that's everything. There's nothing else. They do a fairly good job with the rest, but that's all they say. And again, there were no videos showing how to do it. There was nothing. So I went on the website and I thought, oh, okay, great. Leave your message, name, email. We'll get back to you in 24 hours. So I said, there's nothing in your documentation on how to make this thing continuously variable. How do you do it in so many words? And I never heard back from them. So, Insight Project detracts 1 star. Bing! So both the documentation, it's not bad, but it's too sparse, especially for this one. They should say that. And, some of the, also out of Taiwan and China, they'll even have video series of, here's how you put together the 3D printer, and a little 5-minute video with some nice music in the background. They should have something like that for this. It would take them, an hour to make, and it would make this much better. So maybe that's the most useful part of this video, is I'll show you how you make it continuously variable, because what I did after that is I just started pushing buttons until finally it was like, oh, okay, that's how it works. So if we fire this thing up, and let's go back to this ginormous coil, because it'll be a good example coil of what I'm talking about here. So, it fires up quickly. Everything is clean and bright and easy to read. Yeah, I am. And here we're at 100 kilohertz, and you can see it just can't figure it out, and it's just throwing out numbers. Now, I will say there's a second set of, they look like more complicated leads. And so I'm not gonna pull another star from it because I don't know what I'm doing. And it may be that someone will say, of course, you got to use the special leads in order to get a reading for something like that. What are you, a dummy? But what I will say is that when you're not at the extremes, by which I mean the point where the reactive resistance starts to take off, it works just fine. So let's go back to, now we're back to, I'm pressing the wrong buttons. Just a moment. So I use that, again, it doesn't show up now, but we're back to show up, well, we're at 100 hertz now. And so it gives us a resistance of 4.177, and that's about what you would see with a multimeter. And so I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I make it go, from 100 to 101? And so I thought, well, maybe you like hold the frequency button down. Now it does do something cool there, is it gives you DCR, direct current resistance. So now it's measuring exactly like your multimeter would. The only difference is, at least my multimeter only goes out to one significant digit. So it'll tell you, well, it's 4.1. This one goes out to 3. Maybe you trust 2 of them. But you can see that it's about 4.09, 4.1 is the direct DC resistance. But it's like, no, that's not how you do it. And it's like, well, maybe you move around with these things. And it moves the cursor all around, the up button, that's not doing anything. So to make a long story short, what I finally realized, you don't press it and hold it. You have it, while this is highlighted there on frequency, you just tap the enter button. Ooh, now you see it? So right now we're at 1,000 hertz. And for some reason, I ended up on inductor. Okay, so here we are. We're back. What you do is when the cursor is over frequency, you just tap the enter button. It gives you this. We're at 100 hertz right now. And that's our resistance. And then you use these to navigate. And then you use the up-down ones. Boom, boom, if that shows up. So now we're at 120 hertz. So here it is at 120. Let's make it at 1,120. Now it won't give you the new reading until you press enter again. So there, this thing has a resistance of 15.8. Now before I forget, the other cool thing this does is this button toggles through the submenus in blue on the bottom there. And I don't know what half of them are saying. This one, can you read it? Q. That's my favorite. So it's calculating the Q factor for you. So the Q factor here is 50. And then we can go back in and let's say 2,000. And what's the Q factor now? The Q factor has gone down. The resistance is just going through the roof. So what this value is, and they're calling it ESR. I guess that would be equivalent series resistance, if these two numbers are the same. I mean, the way I view this is the impedance of the coil at that frequency. That's the impedance, the straight line DC resistance, plus the reactive resistance that you're getting from your skin effect and your proximity effect. But since those two numbers are the same, let's go back to Q. And what you can do then, I mean, we see that 2200 is too fast for this coil, and 2100, let's try 800. 820. So I think the highest the Q was before was 50, and now the Q is 55. So that's pretty good. And what you can do in fairly short order is figure out the frequency for your coil of where the Q is best for any given coil. So that's one of the things that this thing does that you can't do with a regular LCR meter. And so I'm tempted to give it like 5 extra stars for that. But I don't want to get too carried away, and I've only had the thing for a couple weeks. What else? So one thing, as you might have noticed, I figured out some time ago that, well, the higher induction, the lower resistance, now that's going to be a slower tau time, so that should help things. But I've got coils that weigh a pound or two instead of 20 pounds that have a higher Q factor than this. And so that's why I'm saying the game is, how do you arrange this wire in such a way that this one, with all this induction and not much resistance at all, doesn't start stepping on its toes with reactive resistance. Now I'm going to wrap it up here, but I'll tell you a couple other things I'm going to do off camera. One is I'm going to put some welding rods in here. I don't have a ferrite rod, which is what I want. The other thing I tried, which was like a beautiful idea, but it didn't work, is these are 3D printed ferromagnetic, and so they have some iron in them. And I thought, man, wouldn't that be cool if you could just 3D print cores in whatever shape. I'll show you what the problem is with it. So here I've kept it at that 5,500 hertz, but now we're looking at induction 9.85, which is, it's generally pretty much invariant over the whatever frequency. These things, they have a tiny bit of iron in them. So, I mean, if they like welding rods, they'd be like jumping up to like 30 or something. So I'm just, if I can mash these in here. So we got 1 extra millihenry, but look, that was one thing I was interested in. The Q factor is now 39. So this actually made a little bit of a difference. But yeah, so there's this, and then later on I'll do a I'm gonna throw in some cut welding rods and see what I can get with the Q. If it's like dramatically worse or dramatically better, I'll try and mention it in a subsequent video. It's gone on long enough, but that's one cool thing you can do with this. And so now you would know exactly what kind of pulse you want for a highly efficient pulse motor. So I hope everyone had fun, and my gosh, if you're on the East Coast, stay warm, stay healthy. Talk to you later. Bye.